Joining us on Times Now today is renowned economist, professor at Columbia University, and also chairman of 16th Finance Commission of India, Dr. Arvind Panagariya. Sir, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. First up,
pleasure, Hina.
Thank you. Sir, amid the tensions in Middle East, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made an appeal to the people of this country to reduce fuel consumption. He's also announced a few other measures to help India preserve foreign exchange reserves. I want to ask you about these austerity measures. How do you view them and why are they needed right now?
Okay, Hina. So, I'm fully with the Prime Minister on the requests or exhortations that he has done to the citizens of the country to reduce the consumption of petrol, let's say, also reduce their purchases of gold, in general, perhaps reduce the purchases of imports. These are, in my view, largely moral suasion measures that the Prime Minister announced, which a good leader should always resort to first when there is an external crisis, especially. And what we face currently is an external crisis. As a first line of defense, I think this is a hallmark of a good leader, that rather than intervene heavily with all kinds of different policy instruments, first try to do it through moral suasion. So that part, I'm with the Prime Minister. On other measures, I think we can discuss as you progress.
Okay. Government is also trying to lead by example. I want to understand from you, what is the economic cost of asking people to consume less?
This is a complicated question. Well, the answer is complicated. The question is not. Because obviously, when you have to cut your consumption, I have to cut my consumption of certain things, which in normal circumstances I would have consumed. It's going to make me feel a little worse off. At the same time, when I do it voluntarily, thinking that I'm doing it for the country, this is a part of my contribution to the country in times of crisis, I don't feel as bad. So this is the sense in which the moral suasion approach is a good approach, because people are doing it voluntarily. And in this sense, then I would say that no, there is no real cost to it. People realize that as citizens, this is their duty, and they also do it voluntarily. So, if there is a cost, a minimal cost. Anything else will cost more, because they will then do that involuntarily. So this is how I see it.
Okay. With no clear end to tensions in sight, should we prepare for a big shock? As Mr. Uday Kotak said the other day, one should prepare for the worst.
Well, look, in a way, so far we seem to have escaped, meaning, we in India seem to have escaped at least some of the direct impacts of the war. Here in the United States, the price of gasoline, for example, has risen from approximately about $4 per gallon on the average before the war to now $6 per gallon at its peak currently. That's a 50% increase in gasoline price. India has only yesterday, I think, raised that price by about 3%. And that's a very small increase. We got to be prepared for larger increase, because obviously somebody is absorbing the increase in the crude price, in the hike in the crude price, because hike in the crude price is significantly larger. I don't think that can be sustained over a long, just a 3% increase can be sustained for a long period. I think it will have to be a bit of a larger increase. And I hope, that we try to deal with it through a price instrument, meaning therefore increase in the price, rather than, go back to our old bureaucratic instincts, trying to cut the consumption of gasoline here and there through fiat, meaning through some sort of bureaucratic executive orders. That's not the right, those are old instruments, I think, didn't serve us well. The logic simply is that when you allow the gasoline price to rise, then the economization is done by everybody. Each of us look at what are our least pressing needs, and we try to economize by not trying to fulfill those least pressing needs. And so in this sense, I think, the price instrument spreads the cost and it works on all margins. So that I think would be the way to go. The government has wisely chosen to move the price gradually, but I think, citizenry should be prepared. This is not, this is an external crisis with which every country is having to deal with, and we too.
Okay, so citizens must be prepared for how much more? We've seen a 3 rupee increase in both petrol and diesel prices here in India. The loss per litre on petrol right now is still 15 rupees, and the loss per litre on diesel is around 60 rupees for the oil marketing companies. How much more are you expecting? Because on 27th of March, the government did slash the excise duties on petrol as well as diesel. So some shock was absorbed in March itself. How much more are you expecting it to go up?
Right. So this is a guessing game. This is a guessing game. It's both, the question is both about how much more and how long. That is something which is harder to predict. There is no point for me to try to put out a figure on it. But basically, the increase will be less than the increase in the crude price, because some of it will have to be absorbed by the suppliers as well. Some will fall on consumers, and some of it has been absorbed by the government. So those are the three kind of entities involved here: the government, the consumer, and the sellers of gasoline, sellers of petrol. So it will have to be divided among those three. Who bears how much is going to depend also on how much the government is willing to absorb and so forth. But it will have to be spread.
Is there any scope for more cushion by the center? Can states reduce VAT? Because this is clearly being seen as fuel price pain for the people here in India.
See, the governments also have limited capacity because the government's budgets are also stretched. Both the union government and the state governments. So some state government budgets are a little better off, so maybe they can absorb better. Likewise, union government's budget may be a little better off than some of the state governments. Some state governments are very, very pressed for finances. So it is variable across different governments, the union and the 28 state governments. But it is going to depend ultimately, it's not purely a function of the capacity or how much room the government has, but also how the government wants to spend its money. If the governments want to spend their money differently, then that's that. But governments more sensitive to the needs of the consumers of petrol. Will absorb a bit more.
Okay, but these are also politically sensitive commodities. Did elections play a role in the relief that people got for at least 76 odd days?
It's possible. Given that the parties fighting elections make all kinds of promises of all sorts of freebies and so forth, it's totally possible that this relief was also to some degree the result of the 5 elections that were going to happen, and the ruling party at the center was obviously contesting elections in all 5, but also the other parties which are ruling in the other states did not increase the prices either, right? I mean, we know that. But at the same time, the relief given certainly by the state governments was almost nothing, even during these elections, right? I mean, they could have gone in and cut the excise, but they didn't. Only the union government, to my knowledge, did some of it. So, it depends. Union government is always under greater scrutiny, and therefore, union government generally is, but it also has a little more flexibility, I would say, than some of the state governments.
So now there is one more argument here in India that when Brent prices were low, the benefit was never passed on, but the burden is now being passed on. And specifically, people are talking about this period from 2022 to 2026, because the price hike that we've seen this time is actually the first time since May 2022.
So there are two issues here, what are the lessons in the longer term for the government from this experience? And there, I would say that there is something to be said that let the market operate, so when the crude prices fall, so hold the excise duty rates kind of stable. So that when the crude prices fall, let the price fall, and when crude prices rise, let the price rise. This effort by the government to smooth out the prices, etc., doesn't work actually, because at some point you're forced. Your hand will be forced. So that's a longer term lesson. But the very fact that this happened in the last some years, I don't see as an argument actually not to act now. Okay, so that was the history, and one can, keep going back into the history. So many mistakes our governments have made, I can go back to the time that, in 2004, Vajpayee government had actually deregulated the petrol price. The UPA government came in and reintroduced it. Then the UPA government, as it was completing the term, reintroduced, etc. So there is always that kind of history. But when faced with a particular crisis situation, that history is immaterial. You got to do what you got to do. What is in the interest of the country at this point is what you have to do. However, a lesson must be learned that, look, this trying to fine tune based on how the crude price moves, the tax rate itself is not a good idea. Hold your tax rates firm and let the market find where the price has to go.
Very interesting. Also, sir, the biggest talking point today in India is also about gold. Government is trying to make Indians completely change their relationship with gold, at least for a year, never done before.
So, you see, as long as this is about moral suasion, that the Prime Minister making an appeal that please, for a year don't buy any gold, I'm okay with that. I think this is again appealing to the better instincts of the citizenry, and also, in the longer run, it helps build the national character. So I'm quite okay with that part. Now, there is another part where, we go in and then slap a tariff, raise the tariff, etc. That I'm not so okay with. Because, in the end, I have a long memory on the economic reforms in India, and reform of the duty on gold was a very difficult reform that was done. And all governments had made the effort after 1991. Reforms were launched. And we had brought this tariff on gold actually nearly to zero, because there had been so much smuggling going on of gold. If you recall, well, you don't recall, you're too young for it, but you can certainly watch the movies from the 70s and 80s, and you'll see, these are all about gold smuggling.
Yes.
And they represented the reality. I mean, this was rampant, and there was a nexus between gold smugglers and the customs agents at the border and so forth. So all that was actually cleaned up. Tariffs were, I think, brought to zero or near zero anyway. And then that 2012-13, that the tapering crisis happened when the rupee started depreciating. The current account deficit, in 12-13, I think, and 11-12, 12-13, and maybe even 13-14, had spiked. The current account deficit had hit something close to 4%. And at that point, I think, neither the chief economic advisor of the time nor the finance minister understood very well, that a tariff on gold is not the right instrument to deal with current account deficit. You have to use the exchange rate as the right instrument. And so they reintroduced this very high gold tariff. And then, the successor Modi government has continued with that, perhaps may have even raised it a little bit further. And the whole, the nexus between custom agents and the gold smugglers, etc., returns. That's not, the right way to deal with current account deficit is to let the exchange rate handle it. It is a responsibility really of the Reserve Bank of India to manage this current account. And the instrument that obviously it has to use is the exchange rate. So let the Reserve Bank of India take care of the current account deficit rather than use these fiscal measures to correct, because okay, so you can impose a tariff on gold. Maybe some decline in gold imports will happen as a result of the tariff. That I grant, most certainly these things have an effect.
So can I say you're not happy? So can I say you're not?
See, people will import something else.
Yes.
So you don't solve the problem. You see, you can raise the tariff on gold. So what that will do is reduce the gold imports. But then you'll go and import something else.
So you're not happy with government's decision to, hike the import duty on gold and silver?
Well, I have not been happy since Mr. Chidambaram first did it. I think that was an ill-conceived policy, and that reversed a reform which had been extremely hard fought, partly by Dr. Manmohan Singh himself. I mean, he also was instrumental in bringing the gold tariff down. But before he remitted his office in 2014, under him it went back up. And the Modi government then continued actually on pretty much on the same road. So I would, I just think that in general, tariffs are not a good instrument. You should allow trade flows to flow. On this, I'm basically quite okay if we would go complete free trade. It's not going to happen, but as an economist, I think, interfering with trade through these measures is not a great thing. After all, we don't subsidize exports. So we are not giving exporters anything extra. Why they import competing people? Tariff is trying to protect those who are producing the same products that are being imported. So why are they favored and not the guys who actually are the ones bringing you the foreign exchange? So in effect, when you protect all the fellows who are producing goods that are imported,
right,
you're disprotecting those who are producing the export goods, who are the good guys, really, in my opinion.
Okay. Sir, a quick word on the currency. It briefly touched 96 against the dollar on Friday, all set to hit a century. Will that be a level that RBI be okay with? I mean, what's really happening there in your opinion?
Well, again, it is up to RBI to decide where it thinks is the equilibrium rate. It's thankfully not my job, so not my worry. But on the other hand, as an economist, I would say that if it is a choice between letting rupee depreciate and letting current account widen dramatically, I would rather let the exchange rate do its job. That if moving the exchange rate is what is required, because remember what you are doing effectively when rupee depreciates, which means dollar appreciates, the value of dollar rises. When the value of dollar rises, then exporters export more because dollar is more valuable. and
Okay.
the importers import less, and that sort of bridges the gap in the current account.
Okay. Very quickly, sir, what is that one difficult economic truth Indians need to hear today, given the current circumstances?
Well, that, the citizenry is in it together, and it will have to do its role. It is, in the end, the government is nothing but the representative of the citizens. Therefore, there is some hardship that is going to result from the external crisis that is there. We can wish for it to end quickly. I'm sort of optimistic that this is not going to last very long. But next few months it is going to last, and the citizens therefore ought to, there is a temporary burden that will fall. And as long as it's spread, right? It's not only the consumer, but also the producers take part of the burden, and the government takes part of the burden.
Okay. You've spoken about some hardship, so clearly there is a bitter pill coming. How bitter will that be, in your opinion?
No, look, this is, for a responsible economist, it is not something he should or she should speculate on. And look, in fairness, nobody can predict it. The government itself actually is feeling its way as it progresses. So it has tried the 3 rupee or 3% increase. And it will have to wait and see what impact that 3% increase produces, and then act accordingly.
Okay.
So one has to also look at the data, which the government has, I don't have. But all I'm saying is that it is not, we are not, we in India are not in that bad a shape. Really, we forget that we have been growing, even last 3 years after the COVID shock and all, we have grown on average 7.3% a year. No other country of the kind of size India is has done that. So we have been largely, in this sense, a much better place than most other countries.
All right. We'll leave it there. Dr. Arvind Panagariya, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Hina. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.